Ben is not with us, I'm afraid, because Ben is abroad, or he's on his way on holiday somewhere. But he has made us a lovely film.
Hello all, I'm afraid that I can't be with you today because I'm currently driving towards Kent en route to La Belle France for mes vacances. But please, lend me your ears as I want to provide an overview of the new Net Zero Quick Wins funds that are being currently provided by the diocese. I'll jump straight into what the quick wins are and how they might benefit you. Simplistically, they are grants available to churches who want to swiftly access small amounts of money, intended to be up to £2,500, for works that will immediately lower the carbon emissions of your church. And as we all know, almost always improving the comfort of the users of the church and lowering utility bills. Importantly, there's a list of works that are eligible. The grant might be able to pay for some of the smaller works on the list or can contribute to larger ones. They're quick. The application has been deliberately designed to be quick and easy, and the process has been streamlined to ensure that you should receive the funds, if successful, a few weeks after application. This is totally deliberate. The fund is designed to allow churches to get their skates on and not snag up their schedule. However, and importantly, we must receive the application and the quotes prior to works commencing. These grants can't be applied retrospectively for works already done. Just to let you know as well, it is a 2-year programme with a finite amount of funds, around 60k for the 2 years. So there is an element of first come, first served here. So, you know, the sooner you apply, the better. I will also say that think of these projects as swiftly achievable, sort of bite-sized little chunks. They're meant to be small and deliver benefits really quickly, and not make sure that you're worried about huge projects that might slow down momentum. They're meant to be quick kills. Apply, get the money if successful, get it done. Okay, so what is on this list? I hear you say. Well, it's more detailed than what I'm about to show you, but I've maybe clumsily categorized it into 3 loosely related areas. Firstly are building envelope works, such as repairing aspects of roofs, gutters, and windows. Secondly, there are aspects such as glazed porch doors, draft excluders, or items to prevent drafts like door curtains. Next, there are items that are designed to make churches more comfortable in winter, such as heating the person and not the space with direct seat heaters, or taking that approach further and installing infrared heaters. Or maybe if you need money to help to create a separate, more compact space for congregations when it's especially cold, and concentrating heating efforts there. Finally, the quick wins can also be granted for lighting, heating, and efficiency works, such as replacing older light bulbs with far more efficient LED lights, or even contributing to the cost of installing electric heat pumps to replace oil boilers, or even solar panels. It also includes installation of smart meters that allow for more specific and effective temperature control. Finally, it can also be used to pay for roof insulation where appropriate. Finally, I've got a couple of key points here. Firstly, this process does not remove the requirement for the PCC to obtain faculty or other approval as necessary before the work goes ahead. The offer of a grant does not imply support for the proposal for the purposes of a faculty. And also, the decision process goes ultimately through an independent panel. It's neither Rosie nor I that make the final decision. So how do I get all this? I hear you all cry in unison. Well, firstly, the funding email to send inquiries and applications to is here. And there's also my address and my direct telephone number for further questions. Rosie is the factotum when it comes to the quick wins, so please feel free to bombard her or Ben Lilly with questions, or alternatively, I'll be back from holiday in a fortnight. So get thinking, get applying, Et bonne chance. Au revoir.
Oh, he's a cheeky monkey, isn't he, Rosie? That Ben Woods.
He included you in there, not
Yeah,
just
I know,
me.
suggesting that he bombard you and I. Honestly, there we go. Fabulous. Well, that was the inimitable Ben Woods, and over now to the one and only Faye Edwards.
Hello, thank you. I think it made sense that we listened to what Ben had to say first, because the two grant schemes were designed to run side by side. So I'm the Church Building Support Officer, and the role of Church Building Support Officer came out of a national project called Buildings for Mission, which was the result of an independent review done in 2017 that was a survey and an analysis of the state of Church of England buildings across the country. And as we've all just been talking about the various issues, it was determined that there was the vast majority of churches had a huge amount of issues. And so this independent review suggested that a dedicated person in each diocese with an allocated amount of funds would make a massive difference to how church buildings were maintained, but also the approach to maintaining them over time and therefore preventing further degradation. And so I, in Truro, am the result of that. There are 38 of us, I think, across England now. I always go to say the UK, across England. And we very much have been given devolved duty to scope the role as per the requirements of the diocese. Cornwall, as I'm sure you know from being part of national networks, is wildly different from all the other dioceses, but actually all the dioceses say that about themselves as well. So we all have our own unique challenges. So I spent the first few months of my role working out how best one person can support 298 church buildings, and haven't really come to the conclusion of how that might happen. However, the deluge of people contacting me has slowed down somewhat, and so again, with the help of Rosie, we designed and rolled out and processed the system of the Minor Repairs and Improvement Grant. So this is the grant that I administer, I manage internally. Like Ben, I don't have any decision on who is allocated the grant awards. That goes to the same independent panel, of which we have 2 members on this call. So churches are invited to apply for anything that can help preserve the fabric of their building, that can prevent damage that's occurring at the moment, and that will prevent any further damage happening in the future. So the way that I manage the situation at the moment is that generally I talk a lot like this to groups like this, or to deanery synods, or to PCC meetings, about what we can offer, what that might look like, how you go about applying it. When I came to design the Minor Repairs and Improvements Grant, again, I wrote that from scratch. So we have guidance from Buildings for Mission, which is from the Church Commissioners. But I wrote our guidance and our eligibility from scratch. And that's very much based around the things that are going to support Cornish churches. All of the documents are available. I'm sure everybody, if they haven't seen them already, can have them. But churches tend to contact me when either as a result of their quinquennial, to try and respond to the recommendations that are in the quinquennial, or when something has gone wrong. To summarise, there's big patterns. So people will contact me. We have leaky bell towers, so where rendering pointing has been done in cement, and therefore it's causing leaking, running water, ankle deep water. It's been an incredibly wet year this year, and that's had a huge impact on towers. Rainwater goods, again, so where drainage, drain pipes are failing and thereby overflowing, and so the water coming in through the church building. They're the two main reasons: drainage, and then again damp, cold, heating not working. So there's very much about the actual building, and I think this is a good point too. I think it was David was mentioning, you know, these churches have been here since 1387. Why is this happening now? I'm a historic conservationist, and I've worked with listed and heritage buildings for about 17 years. I'd love to be able to answer that question. There isn't an answer. At various points in history, heritage buildings have been an awful lot higher on the agenda of the powers that be. So at one point we had the Ministry of Works, and their entire existence was to pay, improve, repair, maintain, elaborate, embellish heritage buildings. And so there was an awful lot of money available for churches to be able to do that. However, similarly, I often find records of churches in the 1600s embarking on half of a renovation project and then pausing so they could continue fundraising to then be able to do the next part. So some of it as well is 'twas ever thus, in that church congregations, worshippers, local families and communities have been responsible for fundraising to keep their churches maintained. And then many of you will have heard of the DAC, and they are the committee that manage the faculty process. Faculty permission is what we have instead of planning permission and listed building consent. So the Church of England looks after its own permissions when it comes to churches and church buildings. It doesn't go to the local authority for secular planning. And the DAC is the committee that makes the decisions about the faculty permissions. At various points in more recent history, this hasn't been the process. And this is the part that explains somewhat some of the fabric issues that we're seeing now. Changes were made to churches, both embellishments, improvements, fabric changes that weren't necessarily in the best interest of the building themselves. And it's not a precise science. I couldn't tell you the amount of hours that I've spent poring over mortar mixes and lime and where we are in the lime cycle and salt damage and why salt is, you know, there are centuries where there's been no salt damage in buildings, and then there's others where you can see the salt moving up your pillars almost in front of your eyes. But these periods in history where there was no such thing as a DAC and faculty permission didn't go through the same stringent statutory processes as they do now, there were things done to churches that have meant that later down the line, we have an awful lot of catching up to do. So pointing in cement is one of those where, understandably, a church warden or the person who was responsible for looking after the church has seen an error, contracted a local contractor who may not be an understanding of working with medieval buildings, used cement pointing, and then 60, 70, 100 years later, the impact of that is massive. And that then involves either putting an entire tower at risk of not being safe to stand, or a huge and expensive renovation project. So I guess wrapped in that explanation is a justification, a validation of why the DAC exists, why it's important. When you are doing works to churches, depending on the work, it will either require a List A or a List B or faculty permission. List A's and List B's don't go to the DAC. They are decided by the Archdeacon. And I'm sure many of you who've been involved in this will know of Sue Thorold. She's the DAC secretary, and she manages and handles all of those applications. And faculty permission is for where you're making a material change. So that would involved perhaps having a new door. So I think it makes more sense if I bring things to life a little bit. Quite a lot of the work that was done by the Victorians, although it might have been pretty and in fashion at the time, wasn't always in the best interest of the building, or wasn't particularly sensible. It didn't take care of the building. So we have quite a lot of Victorian doors, which are not only not fit for purpose, i.e. they don't keep any breeze or leaves or anything out, but then they actually detract from the natural beauty of the building. And so if, for example, a church might want to replace a Victorian wooden door with an oak frame door or automatic glass doors, that would require faculty permission, because that is the a material change to what's there already. So the minor repairs and improvements grant itself is up to £10,000 for a single project. It's split into repairs and improvements. Repairs would be all the things I've mentioned so far: repointing, drainage, decoration, repairing floors, work on bell towers, works on bells themselves or ringing platforms. I see an awful lot of very, very wet ringing platforms, ringing ceilings, bells that are out of use because the actual access to them is not safe. And the flooring itself, where water has ingressed, whether it's tiles, so they might have lifted. They are the repair side of things. Improvements is more of the kitchens, serveries, toilets, moving pews and replacing them with more flexible worship space. They are more classed in the improvements. The criteria of their minor repairs and improvements grant says that a minimum of 50% of what we spend as a diocese has to go on repairs, but then it's a devolved decision as to whether we could spend 100% on repairs if we wanted to. And that's quite a big driver for us. But there's also a nod to a missional element, and we all quite often laugh about missional toilets. Previously, from funding perspectives, it was often required that there was a community element to a building before it was eligible for other larger funding schemes, such as the Heritage Lottery. And most churches can't offer community events, toddler groups, even things like cafe church, breakfast church, Christian meditation, without being able to offer a loo. And so where possible and where suitable, when churches do want to install a toilet, that would be eligible under the minor repairs and improvements grants. However, it's not often that you can install a toilet for less than £10,000. So the other side of my role is to advise churches on what other funding streams are available. And there are plenty. None of them are easy. I would love to say that they are, but they require an awful lot of work and an awful lot of preparation. But once you have done the work and preparation for one, that information is usually relevant for all of the others. So the main church funders, it's been thought for many years that the Heritage Lottery Fund does not fund places of worship. It does, very much so. In fact, their current strategy, which was launched in January last year, actually prioritises places of worship over any other heritage building, and they offer up to £250,000 in their small grant and £250,000 to 10 million in their larger grant. What's interesting about that is the small grant, up to 250,000, you can apply for that at any time. They have a monthly decision-making process and an 8-week decision process. And so they have simplified and streamlined what they do, and there is no requirement to have a community element. So you don't have to invent a toddler group to be able to qualify to apply for Heritage Lottery funding. They do have 4 pillars, one of which is organisational sustainability, which is gobbledygook to most churches and PCCs. But what it essentially means is they want to see a plan about how the project is going to be carried out. And so they have awarded grants in the past, but because of the voluntary nature of the people who carry out this work in church, often the work hasn't actually taken place. It started and it hasn't finished, and so the project hasn't actually completed. And so what organizational sustainability is project planning to make sure that the beginning and the middle and the end of the project happens. What most churches don't realize is when they want to do most of these kind of works, your first point of call is your QI architect. They know your church, they know the limitations, they know the challenges, they know what the urgent works are. Hello, Ben.
QI.
Quinquennial inspection, which is the statutory building report that is done by again, an architect who is statutorily appointed, and that every church has to have one of those every 5 years, and it comes with a set of recommendations that should create a pathway, it should create the plan of action for a church. I think at that point, I will say, I've spent 9 months visiting churches. I know the reality of what it's like to look after a medieval building on your own, largely, with very little support and very little idea of who to contact and how to do things, and lots of things that are happening that need urgent repair, that you have to protect the safety. I've spent lots of conferences and meetings listening to people who say things like the PCC needs to have some skin in the game, or they need to show that they're committed. And I often feel like shouting. Most of the church wardens I meet are also the gardener, the reader, the bookkeeper, the cleaner, absolutely everything. There is no more commitment than the people that I meet who are running, our amazing churches on a day-to-day basis. So that's what, again, my role is for. Some churches are really fortunate and they happen to have a group of volunteers who are quite excited and they want to see this project through, and they see it as a duty to their community and to their church itself. That's amazing, but it's very, very rare. And so for anybody else, that's when you come to me and I will support you through the application process. So whether that means checking over with the Heritage Lottery Fund, their first stages are called a project inquiry. And so quite a lot of churches will send me their project inquiry document. I'll give it a quick scan and I can see whether they have attached enough significance to these 4 pillars that they require. And I keep mentioning Heritage Lottery, but it's the same with the other funders who are the Benefact Trust, National Churches Trust, Garfield Weston. They all require very similar information. So I think that's I've just seen we're applying for a £250,000 from Heritage Lottery, past the pre-app stage, have some but need more permissions in place. Yeah, so you do definitely need to have, like Ben put his rider in his video, permission, whether it's faculty list A or list B, always needs to be in place before any funding will be granted. One final thing to mention about funding is the Cornwall Historic Churches Trust are absolutely wonderful, and they are one of the few funders who will pay up to £1,000 retrospectively for pretty much anything that's to do with a repair. So if you have an urgent repair of a drain pipe or a stained glass window or a piece of flooring or a piece of rood screen or something, and you have to have it done, all they require is the invoice, and they for repairs once per year per church, they will pay out on that. It's £50 a year to be a member of the Cornwall Historic Churches Trust, and on top of the emergency up to £1,000 grants that they offer, they also have grants of up to £10,000. So a church I've been working with recently had about 4,400 towards a £9,000 gable end repointing job. St John's in the Fields and St Ives, they had £800 for a conservation report, which was needed so they could restore their tin freeze. There's a huge variety of things that are there, but they are, you know, a really good point of call in that sense. So back to the diocesan help. If you want to apply for the MRNI, the Minor Repairs and Improvements Grant, like Ben, I made it a very simple application form, and I've kept it as simple as possible. It does have to show that it aligns with our diocesan priorities, but everything will align with one of them, which is a requirement. We do ask about creation care, but clearly I'm preaching to the converted with this crowd. And also the panel do feedback on things like that. So a really good example was the very first grant that was awarded, which was a redecoration of an interior of the church in Mevagizi. And the decorator had said that he was going to use polythene, plastic sheeting to protect the church interior. And so Ben, quite rightly, and probably Julia as well, picked up on this and said, this is ridiculous. Why would anybody use that? And the decorator replied immediately saying, oh, yeah, no problem. I have some made from potato starch. It does exactly the same job. It's amazing and it's compostable. And so that's the nature of having a consultative panel, is that people can bring in their area of expertise and make sure that we're covering all bases. The people on the panel, aside from Julia and Ben, are a health and safety specialist, a retired priest who she focuses on liturgy, a conservation heritage architect who is also on the DAC, and we did have Joel from social responsibility. So presumably we'll have a social responsibility person in the mix as well. I think that's probably a pretty good roundup of me, minor repairs and improvements, buildings for mission, and other funding sources, and hopefully not too much information. So please ask me any questions, particularly if they're related to things that you mentioned in the first part, because I can't remember those now. And there was quite a lot of things that would have been helpful and relevant.
Fabulous. Faye, thank you. Just before we take questions, I'll throw in a couple of extra pieces. One was to come back to that grant that you can reclaim your VAT. And the second one is, just as an indicator, how many of your churches are using the card terminal giving system? Is anyone using within their church the card terminal giving system? Okay, great. Well, there you go. That's really cool. So round 2 of Give to Go Green will open in November. We've just this afternoon been given permission to go into it. And if you would like information about it, I will send it to you. But rather than do a cover all, because it does rely on you having a card giving terminal, because basically it's match funding up to, I'm going to get this wrong now, it's a really good amount of match funding, and it's basically taking funding through your card terminal, and the Church of England via a certain project will match that giving over a certain period for a specific project. And we just couldn't quite get our act together to make it work in round 1, but luckily our diocesan partners Exeter did. And if I tell you that Exeter achieved £116,000 of additional funding across Give to Go Green, I'm sitting here going, why wouldn't we want to be involved? So if you would like details of that, if you literally just ping me an email to, I'd like to know about Give to Go Green, please, Ben, I will send you over the pack, and it will be done in partnership with the generous giving advisors from the diocese, and then Ben and Faye, depending on whether we need specialist support in that space. I'm going to oversee it, but if you would like to know more about that, we'll make sure we include a link in the newsletter just to remind you. But if you're thinking, I've got a terminal, we could raise some extra money, just send me an email saying, Ben, can I talk to you? And I will make sure I respond. Questions for Faye? Please do fire away.
Might I ask?
Please do, Susan.
Oh, I've lost you again. Sorry, keep falling off. My church is not historic. It's, as I said earlier, 1950s. Will I qualify for any of those grants and things?
Yep. It's there's no stipulation from that at all. So yeah, absolutely. The minor repairs and improvements, which is up to 10,000, it's not listed, is that right?
It's not listed.
Do you know whether you need faculty permission?
We would do, yes.
Okay, so some churches, most unlisted churches do not require faculty permission. They are outside of the faculty jurisdiction. But some unlisted churches are not. Basically, once faculty has been granted, then forever after that. So you do need permission, but you're also entirely eligible for the minor repairs and improvements grant.
I will double check what I've just said to you there, but
it's quite, if you wanted to send an email, it's really easy for me to check on the online faculty system. So I'm working with St Thomas's in Haymore at the moment, who are having a kitchen and loo, which is very much a missional kitchen and loo. They're in a very deprived area, and they're not listed, and they're outside of the faculty jurisdiction, so they don't need permission at all.
Okay, thank you.
Eileen,
you didn't mention roofs.
you can't get much of a roof for
£10,000. We've got a church that needs half a roof repairing, and £10,000 towards that would be wonderful.
So that might have highlighted one thing I didn't make clear. The minor repairs and improvements grant has to be a whole project. It can't be £10,000 towards something else. That's because it is the stitch in time principle was what the report that the independent review into church buildings found, that the main thing that churches weren't able to do themselves was the small but necessary jobs over time. And so to be able to allocate the funds for that meant that the problems didn't escalate into the much larger problems. However, Heritage Lottery Fund starts at £10,000. If you were to apply to them for under 250, a lot under, the likelihood of you being successful is loads higher. So because the lower fund is 250,000 limit, most people apply for 240,000 in 999, because once you get over that, it is a very, very difficult application process. So you're far more
nothing like that much. I think we have an estimate of about 18,000 or something like that.
So if you went to the National Lottery and asked for 10.5, that's big enough to still go to the Heritage Lottery, and you're an awful lot more likely to get it than you would be if you were asking for 200,000.
They do need a contribution, don't they? No, I thought they did last time.
That's changed as well. Yeah, that's changed as well. They like one, but again, I would say to go to what listing is your church?
I'm not quite sure.
So Cornwall Historic Churches Trust, again, they might supply 2,000, 4,000, 5,000. Then if you added that onto a Heritage Fund application as well, then and also the quick wins included roof repairs, because that is again contributing towards net zero, so that could also give part of that as well. So it's a case of having the tenacity and the appetite to go through the applications, but they do exist, and they are there.
Okay, right, thank you.
Maggie,
have you got this all listed for us that we can just print it off for reference?
Yeah.
That would be really helpful. Thank you. Lovely. Yes, I mean, and do I understand correctly, with the small grant sort of, you call it, you don't have to do match funding at all?
no, the diocesan, the diocesan grant that's under 10,000. No, it's We do ask for we're supposed to ask for a minimum of 10% contribution or some contribution from church. That hasn't happened across the board because some churches simply do not have it. We do ask for an indication of the amount of money that church has as part of the application. So that's taken into consideration. But essentially, there is no match funding requirement, or if it is there, it's minimal.
Well, I would like a visit from you very soon, please. That's great. Thank you.
And I also, I guess, you're not all church wardens, are you? Or maybe you
No.
are.
So I
No.
want to know, have our church wardens all been circulated with your details about
A lot, but
minor wins?
yeah, they have plenty. However, wherever I go, people seems to be astonished that I exist. So somewhere between writing the email and putting the piece on the website, it doesn't quite land in the right places at the right time. So please do mention. I didn't mention the grant fund that I have is £137,000 over 2 years. And as is with Ben's, is very much on a first come first served basis. No grants make it to the panel if they are not eligible. So they come to me in the first instance, and I check them for eligibility. Then they go to the Archdeacon for their approval per se, and then they go to the panel. And so unless there is something materially wrong with the application or that the panel really don't agree, they are going to go through. There is no real reason. They're different from other grant funds that we've offered at a diocesan level before, because they have been less clearly needed, whereas repointing towers, fixing bell platforms, reconstructing collapsed drainage channels, they're so vital and fundamental that most things that have come in, so everything that's come in so far has been approved, and so the fund won't last forever. So in terms of passing the information on to the church wardens, if they are the people, and they usually are, who know about the works that need doing, then I would do it sooner rather than later to make sure that there's money left in the pot.
We do hope that this first run at this is part of the Church of England fathoming and working out what works well across dioceses and what's accessible for funding. And it's worth having in your kind of thinking that next year, 2025, is the beginning of the second triennium of funding. So each triennium is a 3-year window. There are 3 triennium, 9 years of funding in total. And the second triennium is the most loaded part of the funding in terms of material works. So I think at the moment it's somewhere between 60 and 90 million across the country that's available in triennium 2, although I will say that the church commissioners are under some significant pressure about the figures that were originally offered. So we will wait and see, but our hope is that there will actually be ongoing funding, because if one diocese or one church, if we are unable to find a way to mitigate net zero and reduce our emissions, basically this is what it all comes down to, is going to come down to emission reduction. If one diocese fail, all fail effectively. So we kind of need to stand together and, as a church and make this happen in as much as we're able to. Any more questions for Faye? Look at that, wonderful. Joyous peace. Okay. Faye, was there anything else you wanted to?
Yeah, with regard to what you're just saying about hopefully this being 2 years of a much longer, more in-depth project, the CBS, the church building support officers throughout the country have been permanently feeding back to the church commissioners about how the project is going. And one of the biggest patterns in the feedback has been that the limit needs to be 20,000 rather than 10. There's an awful lot of work that you can do for 20,000 that really makes a big difference. If money were no object, or if I had a magic wand or the capacity to fix things without money, then roofs and rainwater goods would be the single things that I would focus on. There isn't a church in Cornwall that could have its rainwater goods entirely repaired or replaced for under £10,000, but for under £20,000, that would be an awful lot of hoppers and gutters and drain pipes and empty drains. And so it's worth mentioning that there is a real understanding that this is a process that is evolving all the time, and we are feeding back to those with the powers of decisions that there could be specific changes that would make this an awful lot more useful and practical in terms of protecting our buildings. I think from my perspective, though, the most important message I would like to give to those of us who do look after our church buildings is that we don't want people to feel as if they are carrying this huge burden on their own, or that it's stressful, or that it's causing sleepless nights, or that they're worried about people's safety. That's not what church is for. And we really want to convey the message that as a diocese, we do have these roles that are specifically to support parishes when they do feel like that in these circumstances. And as much as I may have said, how can one person support 298 churches? I'd much rather you pick up the phone or send me an email when things are stressful and when things are difficult, than feeling like that you're worrying about them and having to carry these incredible buildings on your own.
Fabulous. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Faye, thank you for everything you've shared with us and all the options that are open to us. I do urge you, if you haven't caught that and you're thinking, wow, actually there was something really important there, just drop Faye an email, and she will respond, as will I, as will Rosie. There are a couple of things to throw out into the room just to bring to your attention. Firstly, that the Eco Church award system changed this week, and so we're now on the new bronze, silver and gold surveys. And if you're partway through an award, you can see that through to completion. I think the cut-off date I think is going to be January. I'll need to confirm that, but there is a new revised process just to try and make sure it's constantly got good rigor attached to it. And in November, there will be a series of webinars coming to speak about those changes. We have actually invited Polly Eaton, who leads on this work from A Rocha, to come and speak to us in January. And we hope that we will secure her time and she will come and talk to us about that. Also, just to say that on the newsletter, we will include info about COP16 and COP29. A briefing document was done for the Church of England. It's really good. And it includes kind of basically what's going on in the COP16 is a biodiversity COP, and COP29 is the kind of the big business COP, as it were. So there's loads of information about those, but there's also been produced by our colleagues in the central office. Hey, thank you, Rosie. A really great thing called A Short Guide to UN Conferences. And this is it, I think, probably. Is this the one, Rosie?
Yeah, this is
Great.
it.
The Short Guide to UN Conferences just gives you a kind of an idea of what's going on and how you can respond. But within there are also two things that have been developed by our friends at Green Christian. And there are two resources there. One is that all the way through COP, there's an opportunity to pray. So there's joint daily prayer at 8 a.m. every day during COP. And if you want to join with that, about 90 people on average join that to pray on a daily basis. And then there's also a reflection which Green Christian have written around that too. And I think if you go to the bottom of that page, Rosie, I think there's a prayer. And we're going to use that prayer to close our, there we go, to close our session today. Before we get there, I'm just thinking if there is another piece of information I need to share with you. Rosie, what else was there in notices?
Those are the three things, except you might want to say about our next gathering with Andrew Hill. Thank you.
Yes. Next gathering is a daytime gathering in November. It's on November the
14th.
14th. It's going to be a day out then. And Andrew's going to come and share with us. So we're very grateful to you, Andrew, for making the time to come and do that. So we're really looking forward to that. So as we come into land, let's take a moment to pause. And then I think let's join together in this prayer that we're being asked to pray through COP and beyond. Let's pray together. Creator God, giver of life, you sustain the earth and direct the nations. In this time of climate crisis, grant us clarity to hear the groaning of creation and the cries of the poor. Challenge us to change our lifestyles, guide our leaders to take courageous action, enable your church to be a beacon of hope, and foster with us a renewed vision of your purpose for your world through Jesus Christ our Lord, by and for whom all things were made. Amen. Well, friends, that's the end of this month's Creation Care Network gathering. Thank you for sacrificing your evening to come and spend time together, to share together, to just hear each other's stories of what's going on. That particularly is one of the most powerful things we do on the monthly basis, just to hear what's happening in each other's settings and to recognize that we're not alone in this, that we do share common problems and rejoice in common goodnesses that happen. And thank you for everything you do that cherishes creation, cuts carbon and speaks up. So we look forward to seeing you again soon. Please do reach out if we can support you in any way. And great to see you all.